Hello, this is Dan Richardson at the Chapel of the North Hills. We're going to start today to look at a few chapters right in the middle of Isaiah. These are historical chapters, and they are inserted in the middle of his prophetic speeches. And so we're looking for a few weeks from Isaiah 36 through 39. And we like to think about a storm in this time. Sometimes a storm is sound and fury, signifying nothing. But at other times, it's a serious threat and must be dealt with. If you face one of these serious storms, you're going to decide who you really trust. Do you trust a person or do you trust God? So when it comes to God, you've got to decide whether or not you can really trust him. Is he really better than the other options? Do you have any other options? Do you have any other resources? Well, we're going to set the scene here. Chapter 36, verses 1 through 3. Let me read it. In the 14th year of King Hezekiah, King Sennacherib of Assyria attacked all the fortified cities of Judah and captured them. Then the king of Assyria sent his royal spokesman along with a massive army from Lachish to Hezekiah at Jerusalem. The Assyrians stood near the conduit of the upper pool by the road to the launderer's field. And Eliakim, the son of Hilkiah, who was in charge of the palace, Shebna, the court secretary, and Joah, the son of Asaph, the court historian, came out to him. So right now, we have the scene. We've got one big superpower in the world, and that is Assyria. And not only was Assyria the only superpower in the world, it was a mean superpower. It was cruel. And it was one of the most evil regimes that the world has ever known. The previous king of Assyria had obliterated the northern kingdom 20 years earlier. And now Sennacherib, the new king, was on a campaign through Judah. The king was staying with the main army back at Lachish. And while he was there, the emissary came to Jerusalem with this message. And here's the message, starts in verse 4. The royal spokesman says, "Tell Hezekiah, the great king, the king of Assyria, says this. What are you relying on? You think mere words are a strategy and a strength for war? Who are you now relying on that you have rebelled against me? Look, you're relying on Egypt, but that splintered reed of a staff will pierce the hand of anyone who grabs it and leans on it. This is how Pharaoh, king of Egypt, is to all who rely on him. Suppose you say to me, we rely on the Lord our God. Well, isn't God the one whose high places and altars Hezekiah has removed, saying to Jerusalem and Judah, you are to worship at this altar? Well, he was calling Sennacherib the great king. Notice that the spokesman refused to call Hezekiah a king at all. So at some point, you are going to be taunted that the enemy really is a stronger power. He also said in verse 6 that Egypt was too weak. And trusting Egypt would be like leaning on a broken walking staff. It's broken and it gives you splinters in your hands. At some point, you're going to realize that earthly friends and resources and networks is all insufficient. He also said that Hezekiah had been tearing down the worship of God. In verse 7, he said, isn't that the God that Hezekiah has taken all these altars down? Well, this just really showed that the Rabshakeh, although he could speak Hebrew, he totally misunderstood the Hebrew religion. He really did not understand that all of those high places were not worshiping Yahweh, that there was only one place to effectively worship Yahweh, and that was at the temple. And Hezekiah had made the rounds through the country, tearing down these high places and altars, saying, the temple is where we worship, the temple and nowhere else. He was enforcing the worship of the real God. Getting rid of idols, is important. And it's got to be done repeatedly because idols build up around us. Anytime we substitute something else for the worship of God, we are creating in our heart an idol. So do you think that you're more spiritual just because you have more idols? No. Get rid of those idols. Tear them down. Destroy those high places. They are standing between you and a proper relationship with God. Now, he did engage in a bit of truth here. A bit of trash talk, sorry. He engaged in a bit of trash talk. Now, listen to verse 8 and 9. I'll make a deal with my master here, the king of Assyria. I'll give you 2,000 horses. All you have to do is supply riders for them. If you've got enough people, I'll give you the horses to ride. You can't even drive back one single officer of one of my master's servants. How can you rely on Egypt for chariots and horsemen? I've attacked this land to destroy it. Don't you think that I've had God's approval to do that? The Lord said to me, attack this land and destroy it. Now the emissary, the Rabshakeh, was claiming to act on behalf of God. He was saying that he was doing God's will. There's a lot of voices that are going to try to tell you what God is saying. Don't fall for it. God has given us his word. Well, in verse 11 through 13, the leaders that are hearing this are asking him to speak Aramaic instead of Hebrew, but he refuses. They asked him, please speak in Aramaic since we understand it, but don't speak in Hebrew because that's in the earshot of all the people on the wall. But that was not going to follow here. The royal spokesman said, has my master sent me to speak these words to you and your master alone? No, I want to speak to all the men who are sitting on the wall, because they're the ones that are destined to eat their own excrement and drink their own urine. Yeah, harsh words here. Listen to what the great king, the king of Assyria says. Don't let Hezekiah deceive you, for he cannot rescue you. Don't let him persuade you to rely on the Lord, saying, the Lord will rescue us. This city will not be handed over to the king of Assyria. Rabshakeh is saying, don't listen to the king, because it will be handed over. And don't trust in God. That's just more and more propaganda coming down the line. Then he even promised a vine and a fig tree. Look at verse 16. Don't listen to Hezekiah, for this is what the king of Assyria says. Make peace with me and surrender. Then every one of you can eat from his own vine and fig tree and drink water from his own cistern. Until I come and take you away, and I'll bring you to a land that's just like your own, full of grain and new wine and bread and vineyards. Propaganda continues. It's kind of like other places in the Old Testament where you read about vines and fig trees. Those are symbols of peace. He's offering peace. All you have to do is bow down to me and worship me and join our merry band of Assyrians and give us all your money and we'll let you have peace. You can have all the peace of slavery that exists. Well, lots of places talk about the vine and the fig tree as being peace. But there's also that warning. Later on, another prophet said, don't listen to the voices that promise peace and peace when there is no peace. Jeremiah 6, Jeremiah 8 also. Don't listen to the voice that promises peace when you know that there is no peace. Instead, there is one source of peace, and that is with God. He gives us, according to Philippians 4:7, the peace that passes understanding. And that is the only source of true peace. Well, now the Rabshakeh goes on to say that Judah's God is just as weak and helpless as all the other gods. Follow me here at verse 18. Beware that Hezekiah does not mislead you, saying that the Lord will rescue you. Has any one of the gods of the nations rescued his land from the power of the king of Assyria? Where are the gods of Hamath and Arphad? Where are the gods of the Sepharvaim? Have they rescued Samaria from my power? Who among all the gods of these lands ever rescued his land from my power? So will the Lord rescue Jerusalem from my power? No. But the people then kept silent. They didn't say anything because the king commanded them, don't answer him. And then Eliakim, the son of Hilkiah, who was in charge of the palace, and Shebna, the court secretary, and Joah, the son of Asaph, they came to Hezekiah with their clothes torn apart, and they reported to him the words of the royal spokesman. So, the main point that Rabshakeh makes is Sennacherib is stronger than your God. That's the bottom line with Rabshakeh. Don't trust in your God because Sennacherib is stronger than God. Well, we've got to remember our God is not weak and helpless like the other gods. See, if all the other religions are equal, if all religions are equal, then Rabshakeh here in his taunting is correct. He's right. But if the Bible is right, then what Sennacherib did to all the other gods is irrelevant. I'm going to go with the Bible. So here's the perfect storm. 7, is the number of perfection. And Rabshakeh makes 7 statements against God. 7 times does the Rabshakeh say not to trust in God. And 7 times does he say that God will not deliver them. Well, Isaiah had met Hezekiah's father, the Isaiah that wrote this book. He had gone up to Hezekiah's father Ahaz, and he told him not to be afraid and not to trust Assyria. That's Hezekiah's father. And the Lord had said, go out with your son Shear-Jashub to meet Ahaz at the end of the conduit of the upper pool by the road to the fuller's field. That's what Isaiah had said to Ahaz, Hezekiah's father. That was in Isaiah chapter 7, toward the beginning of this book. When the Rabshakeh came to challenge Hezekiah, he stood at the very same spot. So the king of Assyria sent the Rabshakeh with this massive army from Lachish to the king of Hezekiah, and the Assyrians stood at the conduit of the upper pool on the road to the fuller's field. That's the same spot. So now we get a chance. The country gets a chance to undo what they had done wrong a generation earlier. Ahaz didn't listen to God. He didn't take Isaiah's prophecy to heart. And he tried to make a bargain with Assyria. Now, the Rabshakeh of Assyria stands on the same spot, and Hezekiah is faced with the same dilemma. Do I try to make peace with Assyria, which can only come by our surrender? Or do I trust in God? Well, that's how our story is shaping up. But let's remember some principles here. The enemy might be strong. We might face a superpower. But God is stronger. It said, be of good cheer because I have overcome the world. Remember 1 John 4:4. Remember also to depend upon God instead of other people. And when we're faced with spiritual struggles, don't give in to fear and intimidation. because God is the real God. The God of the Bible is the real God. Other people have trusted all kinds of other gods and other religions, and that is irrelevant because none of those are real. They're all figments of their imagination. But we have a real God with real power, and we can really trust him. He will deliver his people. Be blessed.